Thank you. For the purpose of concluding our conversation on these issues, let me ask Ellen Hannock and Jay Lund to come back to the witness table. And if Dr. Thompson and Dr. Glick will stay put, we've got a few questions for the four of you. So one of the things that I've been thinking about as it relates to the issue of water is that as I think about other perfect. So I've been there was a time when if I wanted to make a telephone call, well, a little before my time, but I would rotary dial the operator who would plug in connectors, and it was a completely centralized system. Telephones today are completely decentralized, distributed. We've been moving increasingly and to opportunities for distributed energy. That's solar panels on my roof, and so I'm not using the grid as much. And what are the opportunities for a distributed system for water in California? Can we do for water what we've been doing, what we did with the telephone, or what we're moving towards in energy?
So let me start by saying that there are certainly greater opportunities for a more distributed water system than we are employing today. And I think water reclamation and reuse is a good example of why we need to be moving towards a more distributed system. Right now, in a lot of cities, what we do is we collect all of our wastewater. We then bring that down to the wastewater treatment plant. As a general matter, your wastewater treatment plant is probably going to be at one of the lowest locations in your city, because historically what you did was you discharged that wastewater into the ocean or into a river or stream. You then treat that wastewater, and if you have a centralized system, you then have to actually pump that water back up to where your customers originally produced that particular wastewater. That's going to require energy, and to the degree that you need to be using purple pipe, you're also going to be digging up a lot of people's streets and putting in a lot more piping. The CANDO system, which I showed you earlier for water reuse, is actually designed to be a distributed system so that you could actually recycle your water on a neighborhood basis. That would save you on energy costs, it would save you on piping costs, and in addition to that, you could recycle your water to the particular standard that each individual neighborhood needed. Of course, an even more distributed system would be a gray water system in which the water does not even leave your house. I think inevitably we will have, just as in the energy area, a spectrum of water sources. Some will be centralized, some will be distributed down to the individual house level. But I think just as in energy, we will be moving towards a more distributed system.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think there's a lot to be said for having distributed systems, and we've benefited from that in a lot of sectors, and we've suffered from that in a lot of sectors. You can look at our distributed transportation system and all the air pollution and carbon footprint that we have because we all have individual cars. On the water side, I think there's a lot you can do on the urban side to reduce water use. Israel uses about 100 liters per capita per day, which is about 25 gallons per capita per day. If you want to go more extreme, well, when I go sailing offshore, I budget for 2 gallons per capita per day. You know, if we go to composting toilets and all kinds of things, we can really get it down pretty low. But that's already 20% of the water use in the state, of human water use in the state. We can probably get that down by half without a lot of trouble, I would think. It's on the agricultural side that this doesn't work very well. We started off with a very decentralized system of water supply for agriculture back in the 1800s called rain-fed agriculture. We found that it wasn't very profitable. There's a lot of calls for, there's been a lot of discussion over the years about improving water use efficiency in agriculture. We've seen a lot of it to the point where one of the problems that we're seeing is insufficient recharge of aquifers, because that's the major way that we've recharged aquifers in much of the Central Valley, is with the so-called inefficient use of irrigation water. So in the end, there's some sort of an optimal level of inefficiency in agriculture that we need to keep the groundwater in balance. So my worry is that on the big side of things, on the agricultural water demands, many of the things that we talk about, that we love to talk about on the technology, and I like talking about technology too, aren't going to get us anywhere in the business of agriculture, which has to fall within a very narrow price range. On the urban side, we can pay a lot more, we can do a lot more, but we don't use that much to begin with anyway on the statewide basis.
Thank you. Before I ask the next question, folks who are broadcasting this have asked me to have a couple of people move. Nouriel, where do we need?
This way or this way? That way?
Go on this way.
Okay.
Those two seats, you have a mic there.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll put Ellen
Okay,
down here, I
okay.
think.
All right.
I think we're all supposed to slide
Or
over.
we could.
We're supposed to slide over.
Do you want us all along the side then? No, just two. Just two here and two there. Oh,
Perfect.
Okay.
We've made them happy, and for those of you who are watching this or will watch it on rebroadcast, we apologize for the brief technical adjustment that we needed to make, but hopefully this will make it better. Let me ask each of you to comment on this. If I could give you complete control over the delivery of water in California, what are the couple of things you'd do to change the system?
People keep offering that, but they never actually give me the
Delivered.
control.
That's right.
I said if I could.
So the problem, of course, is not just delivery. The problem is this integrated system. If you would rephrase that, or if I could answer the question I'd like to answer, which is, what are the key things we ought to be focusing on? In addition to the conservation and efficiency and the stormwater capture and the reuse that I've described, I'm going to raise three things. I'm going to raise two things that are really hard, but that I would think the legislature might try and consider. One is, and it's been mentioned a couple of times here, Prop 218 reform. Prop 218 is a barrier, the way it's being implemented right now, to smart water use and to proper funding of the water infrastructure, the changes we need to make. A couple of speakers have already mentioned it. I understand the difficult political lift that may be, but the truth is it's a barrier. And so some kind of reform of the Prop 218 idea is one. The second one is accelerating the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act dates. And again, I understand the political challenges that in even getting through the act, and getting the act through the legislature was heroic, and you all deserve credit for that. But like the timing for the implementation of water meters was put off and would have been a tremendous benefit if it had been a little faster, we don't have the time to get our groundwater into balance by 2040, which is what the Management Act requires. And if there was an opportunity, as politics may permit, to accelerate some of those efforts, the state would move much more quickly toward a more sustainable system. I just throw those two things out.
So I actually like Peter's, but I'll go on and suggest some other possibilities. So earlier what we were talking about were the variety of opportunities that we have right now in the state to have a more secure and resilient water system, and the technologies that could be developed in the future. So if I were heading up utilities, what I would want to do is to think about how do you create a system that encourages the greater adoption of those technologies, and how do you create a system so that all of the water suppliers in the state are doing an even better job of scoping out those new technologies and adopting them. And for me, it would come down to, number one, a question of the pricing of the water, and that gets back to Prop 218. We have a problem right now adopting some of the pricing systems that we should, with Prop 218 applying in the water sector. A second thing I would probably do would be to institute a more systematic approach to research and development amongst water suppliers. If you look at the R&D which takes place, again, in the energy sector, look at PG&E, look at Southern California, Edison. They have significant operations focused specifically on research and development and adoption of new technologies. Some of our larger water utilities do also, but we have so much fragmentation in the water field that there are a lot of water suppliers that have very small, if any, operations in that particular area. So I would probably have a requirement that every water supplier either have some type of a systematic approach to research and development, or they collaborate with other utilities to do that. And perhaps this is, again, an operation for the state, that given the degree of fragmentation, that the state should take on a responsibility for looking at research and development in the water field and helping to test out new technologies and disseminating that knowledge down to the individual water suppliers.
Dr. Hannig?
We're going to make our way around the table.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna do one, which is just a little tip to some work that several of us have been preparing, specifically looking at the water rights system. I think this is actually, it sounds like it's a heavy lift, but it's not such a heavy lift given all the progress we've made so far, which is to streamline the administration of our surface water rights. And right now we've got a system with 3 different categories of surface water rights. We've got riparian, we've got pre-1914 appropriative, and then post-1914 appropriative. And in the modern era, when you've got to manage water in real time more efficiently, it just makes sense to bring those all under the same administrative system and improve the information about it, maintain the seniority, everybody's rights. It'll actually improve it'll strengthen rights, and it'll make it easier for us to manage in real time. So that's one, and I think that's actually not a very heavy lift given all the progress we've made over the last 5 years or so. And then here's the harder lift, and this is something that Buzz and Jay and I and some others have written about before, and we're not the only ones, which is the state should take over the Central Valley Project, merge the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project, and take it out of DWR and make it a public utility. And that would just make it so much easier to manage our system without a lot of the coordination challenges that we now face. They would probably give it to us for $1.
We should charge the money to take it.
Dr. Lund?
Well, these are all good ideas. I'm going to come at it from a different perspective in terms of what other areas where we're having problems. I think the water system currently is functioning rather well for the urban areas. There's a lot of work we can do, a lot of improvements we can make, but most of the reason why we would want to make the improvements in the urban areas is to provide more water for the other areas. Even though it's not a lot of water considering the whole big picture. And to me, the 3 major areas where we're having problems are ecosystems in general. This is the area where we're not very well organized, not very well funded, and not very effective, frankly, in improving the conditions and keeping the conditions in good shape. Related to that is the delta, not only for environmental reasons, but also for flood control reasons and for water supply reasons. We need to address that problem. Again, that's an area where we're getting better organized since the 2009 legislation. I think that really helped, but we have a long way to go, and we need to keep paying attention to it. It's a very difficult problem. The likelihood is we won't be able to figure it out, but we certainly won't figure it out if we don't try. And then the third area is groundwater, where, again, we're making some substantial improvements. So when I look at those 3 areas of problems, my big single thing that I go for is an accounting system. One of our to solve any of these problems and to see the benefits that come out of the urban suggestions that have been made, we got to have a better, more consistent accounting system of where's the water going, who's using it, how much gets returned, and what's it really worth. And it needs to be a common accounting system across all the state agencies, because right now they each different silo within each different program of each different agency has its own accounting system, and it makes discussions very difficult.
Dr. Thompson, you commented about the fact that had a great graph about innovation and how we've seen more innovation in the energy sector than in the water sector. To what extent do you think that's related to a return on investment? I mean, is it? I mean, in the energy field, I think folks have an idea that create something they're going to make some money off it. If we're not pricing water in an appropriate way, does that have an impact on why there isn't innovation?
I think you're absolutely right about that. You know, if you look at why people invent things, sometimes it's because they just love inventing things, but most of the time it's because they hope they can actually make some money on it. And there's obviously a much greater return on investment in the energy sector than there is in the water sector. And so it again comes back to a question of pricing, that so long as we do not charge the full cost of water, then we are never going to either get people adopting conservation technologies, nor will we have the water suppliers have sufficient funds to invest in R&D. And so that's again why, as I said, if I look at what I think are the major barriers right now to innovation in the water sector, it's pricing, number one, and the fragmentation of the industry is the other. Because again, in energy, you generally have some very large energy suppliers, and they're very interested in how they get their costs down as much as possible. So those would be the two things I would focus on.
If I could just add one thing to that, I agree with that completely. I would add, though, it turns out that smart regulations also can drive innovation. Again, California put in place the first efficient toilet standards and the first efficient washing machine standards and the first energy efficient refrigerator standards in the nation. And those standards, those regulations drove innovation in the appliance industry that spread across the country. And now we have national standards for those things, and our refrigerators are hugely more energy efficient than they used to be, and our washing machines are more water efficient than they used to be. So regulations and setting guidelines can also drive that kind of innovation.
So related to regulation, if in terms of dealing with consumption and supply, is there a regulation that we need to get rid of and or a regulation we need to add?
Oh, yeah.
Ellen, they're all looking at you.
We have some suggestions that are going to come out.
We want you to go
tomorrow.
first.
Well, so one thing that we're not very good at right now is being clear on what our environmental regulations mean for how much water should be allocated to the environment. And this has really come up very clearly during this drought. And it's important both for the health of our ecosystems, but also for just the ability to make sound business decisions if you're an irrigator or if you're, in the urban sector in business, to get more clarity on that. So that's a job that really the state needs to take on, and we think that actually there's some good models for doing that harness local energy too, by the state setting an initial standard for what kind of environmental flows you need in a watershed, and then saying to locals, figure out how you want to implement this, and if you can find creative ways to do this more efficiently, come back to us with that proposal. We've seen that happen very effectively on the Yuba River earlier in the 2000s. And then also during this drought on a couple of the small tributaries up in the Sacramento Valley, both the Deer and Antelope Creeks, where the Water Board basically said, look, critical conditions for fish, we need you to curtail, but figure out, work out how you can do that creatively. And I think that really gives a possibility for innovation that is not necessarily technology in the way that Buzz has been talking about, some sort of gizmos and things, but innovation in water management that we clearly urgently need.
Yeah. I should probably worry that it's the economists in the crowd that's both talking about water rights as well as regulations. But on the regulation front, there are clearly regulations that water providers frequently face in adopting new, for example, innovative technologies. We did a survey earlier this year of wastewater suppliers in the state of California and asked them in one of the questions what were the major barriers to adoption of new technologies in the wastewater field. Number one was revenue, that they just didn't feel as if they had the financing available. Number two were regulatory barriers. One of the problems, though, is that those regulations, there is no one particular regulation that you can say, if we change this, it will change the adoption of innovations throughout the state. One of the things that we have thought about doing in the past, this could be potentially a function for a state agency, is actually to look at some of the major areas where there are opportunities for increasing water security through new innovation and looking to see what are the specific barriers, just reviewing that on a systematic basis. On the other side, just as of using regulations as promoters, Peter has already mentioned that regulations of appliances have helped to drive water conservation. And so I think there's still significant opportunity for the state to adopt new regulations that basically force the adoption of new technologies either by consumers or by the water suppliers themselves.
Great, thank you. Let me, at this point, say thank you, but also give you an opportunity to, if any of you have a final comment you would like to make relative to the issues we've been discussing today. Dr. Glick, any final comment?
Well, first of all, thank you, Chairman, for having the session. We hope it'll be a wet winter. We hope it won't be too wet, because, of course, as some of the speakers have noted, we're vulnerable to floods as well. But even if it's a wet winter, these problems aren't going away. And the kinds of solutions that I think you've asked us to speak about today are important for the long-term sustainability of the state's economy, the state's population. We want a healthy agricultural sector, we want a healthy urban sector, and we want a healthy environment sector. And a wet winter isn't going to take away all of our water problems. And so continued attention to these issues is warranted, and I appreciate being able to come and talk to you today. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Dr. Thompson?
So again, I want to thank you for holding this hearing today. Not only is it an incredibly important issue, but I think you put together a great panel of people to help address these various issues. If there's one message, it's that there are solutions out there to the water problems that we have right now. This is not as if we are facing a dire future and there's absolutely no way in which we can solve the water challenges that we face. The policies and the technologies are available, and at this point it's simply a matter of making sure that we set up our institutions in a way that provides them.
Thank you. Dr. Hannigan.
Well, I just also want to thank you, and you have great energy for being able to sit and
Tolerate these PhDs.
and pepper everybody who's come up here with great questions. I'll also just conclude with an optimistic note, because I think that the kind of crises that we've been in with this drought and that we've been through before with past droughts and floods are just tremendous opportunities that Californians have shown again and again that they can rally around and improve the system. And it's thanks to leadership from the legislature and from our elected officials around the state that this can happen. So thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Lund.
Yeah, I'd also like to thank you for your patience with us. The most interesting thing I see in these conversations over the last 30 years that I've been in California on water and through a couple of droughts is the need to be somewhere between complacency and panic. There's always folks out there that just want to panic. They think that things are really terrible and we have to have a revolution, right? And revolution is always the opiate of the intellectual, so I'm afraid that university folks are probably more prone to panic than others. On the other side, there are lots of folks that will tell you, well, things are just fine for me, and we don't really need to change anything. Things are just fine. And I think that's not right either. And so to me, the good decisions, good forward-thinking decisions on water very rarely come out of panic or complacency. And sometimes panic is a little bit useful, just to motivate people. Complacency is a little bit useful to calm people down sometimes so they can think a little more clearly. And that's really where we need to be, is to really just take out our sharp pencils and pencil out what makes sense in terms of what parts of the portfolio approach are the best at different times and different places and different conditions. And that'll be our surest guide.
Good. Let me thank the four of you for joining us today. And we will provide, if I don't know whether there is anyone who would like to make a comment from the public. Please. And you can, if we have a public comment or two, we'll probably take it right here at the table. I think there's one.
Just me?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, and I'm going to make it very short because you've been very patient and it's been a long day for you and everybody else, I guess. I wanted to address the question that you raised with desalinated water. Susan Jordan, Director of the California Coastal Protection Network.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. I should know how to do that already. And to your question about whether desalinated water would allow water to stay in Northern California, reduce reliance on the Colorado, the answer is no, unfortunately. There was some early talk and some promotional messages that for every drop of desalinated water that would come out of the two large water projects down in Southern California, drop for drop would be eliminated from taking from Northern California and the Colorado. That's not true. Also, in terms of desalination, and I know you are going to be having a hearing specifically on that, it's really evolving, particularly in Southern California, as a for-profit, investor-driven business. And that, in turn, is kind of driving technology choices that reduce infrastructure costs. And the way they do that is by not implementing or choosing to build the newer technologies that cost more than using antiquated 1960s open ocean intakes that were used by power plants and are being phased out for that use. So that's something, and that's at cost to the state in terms of the protection of its marine resources. That's why those intake pipes were phased out. So in looking at desal, I think I'm happy to hear the panel's thoughts on that. I agree with them, but there are other issues here that also need to be addressed. So I look forward to your next hearing.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let me just, if folks who are watching, advise them that we are more than happy to take written comments. Those can be submitted to my office at any time. I again want to thank all of those who came today to be a part of our panels and our presenters, those who are here in the audience and those who have been watching this hearing. I want to thank Muriel McHaven on my staff who put together the panels today and provided work on the background material that was necessary for the committee. And would advise you that we are planning additional hearings, and as our last speaker mentioned, we're planning to delve deeper into a couple of these specific source questions, and we will be having a hearing in December, a date to be announced, and that will be in Los Angeles, and the issue there will be desalination. We will have a hearing probably early in January. We anticipate probably here in Sacramento, and that will be digging a little deeper into the issue of recycling and reclamation issues. So the goal of this hearing, of this committee, is to, over probably 3 or 4 hearings, gather some information and provide this information back to the full legislature as a way of helping to provide additional education for the policymakers who have to deal with these issues here in Sacramento. So with that, again, let me thank everyone, and we will adjourn the hearing.